Welcome back to AM Agenda. This morning we've been taking a look at one of the key seats around Brisbane, the seat of Dickson. Our reporter Laura Jays is there. What's the mood on the ground there, Laura?
Well, Kieran, as you know, this is one of 16 marginal seats here in Queensland. At the moment, it is held by the Shadow Health Minister, Peter Dutton, but at the last election, he only held onto this seat by 200 votes, Kieran. And a redistribution of the seat of Dickson also means that this seat becomes notionally Labor. So it's going to be a very close contest here in Dickson, and one Peter Dutton knows all too well. He tried earlier to transfer to a safer Liberal seat, the seat of McPherson on the Gold Coast. He failed to win pre-selection there and is now back campaigning in Dickson. He was even here this morning out handing out pamphlets. But his opponent is from the ALP, is Fiona McNamara. She's a former teacher and a former union official. She's been buoyed. Last week, Julia Gillard was up here. She made a really significant announcement for infrastructure for this part of Queensland. It's the Moreton Bay Rail Link, and this runs right through Dickson and two other marginal areas. Fiona McNamara standing side by side with Julia Gillard last week, and she will certainly be buoyed by that.
Laura Jays there in Brisbane. Thank you very much for that. We'll chat to you throughout the day. Let's get back to our panel now. Senator Mitch Fifield of the Liberal Party and Labor's Mark Butler. Senator Fifield, Tony Abbott's warning of a nasty campaign in the final 3 weeks, that it's going to get personal, but Julia Gillard says why shouldn't the Liberal leader's contradictions be put to him, and on various issues, whether it be the climate change issue, the ETS, or on industrial relations, he's had many backflips.
Well, Tony, just take the issue of paid parental leave. He's been very upfront that his thinking has changed over the years, that as you ponder an issue further, you're entitled to change your mind if you think that there's a better policy on offer. And that's what Tony did with paid parental leave. He's changed them fairly quickly, though, hasn't he, on the ETS, for example? He changed it within a couple of weeks. Well, Tony's indicated that he, as a senior member of the Shadow Cabinet, was supporting the position of the Leader of the Day. And when it got to a position where he could no longer do that, Tony did the honourable thing. He stepped down from the front bench. So, I don't think we can be critical of the way that Tony has conducted himself in relation to the ETS or paid parental leave. You mentioned, Kieran, this being a nasty campaign. I think that the real nastiness in this campaign is all inside the Labor Party. You've seen the leaks against Julia Gillard. You've seen the way that Julia Gillard and her caucus treated then Prime Minister Rudd. Where there's nastiness, look to the ALP caucus. Senator Fifield, on one issue relevant to your own responsibilities as the Parliamentary Secretary for Disabilities, that the opposition leader last night had some comments to make about politicians waffling on about access to cinemas, and he was talking about, disabled access to cinemas. Last night Mr Abbott had to apologise for those comments. Fairly insensitive, aren't they? Well, the point that Tony was making is that ministerial statements have historically been used by government to announce major changes to policy rather than to provide periodic updates on portfolios. But you don't support the nature of what he said, do you? Well, look, Tony recognises that the example cited was a poor one. He's apologised for that. But what I do know as the Shadow for Disabilities is that Tony gets disability issues. Tony knows that the system of support for Australians with a disability is deeply fractured, deeply flawed, and that we need to do better. And that's one of the reasons why Tony and myself are both deeply committed to the work that the Productivity Commission is currently doing to look at the idea of a national disability insurance scheme. And one of the things that we do, if we're fortunate enough to be in government, will be to look very seriously at the recommendations of that commission. Absolutely. Well, let's look at another issue now with Mark Butler, the issue of Kevin Rudd. What are you going to do with him? It's been a big distraction, as Mitch rightly pointed out. A lot of division within the government last week. It was a disaster. And what to do with Kevin Rudd in Queensland? Will you get him out there on the campaign trail? Do you think you should, Mark?
Well, before I go to that, Kieran, can I just respond to a couple of things Mitch just said? I mean, Tony Abbott is surely the first person ever to suggest that the Australian Parliament spends too much time talking about the needs of Australians with a disability and their carers. I mean, it was an extraordinary thing to say. The fact that it even popped into his mind the fact that it even popped into his mind, let alone came out of his mouth, gives you a bit of an insight into the bizarre and quite out-of-touch views that this guy has about a range of policy areas. And you don't just have to look at the ETS as well. I mean, I agree with Mitch that from time to time political figures do change their minds around policy issues, but the sheer scale of the backflips that Tony Abbott has undertaken in the last 6 or 7 months on climate change, on families policy with paid parental leave, something he had adamant views about, on industrial relations, his initial view that there wouldn't be any tax increases under an Abbott government, thrown out the door a couple of weeks later. I mean, we really need to analyse quite what Tony Abbott has said and done over the last 6 months to wonder what life would be like.
And what about Kevin Rudd? What are you going to do with him?
Well, look, I think Kevin Rudd needs to be given time, as his wife has said, to recuperate from the surgery that he's had. Now, I'm not his doctor. I don't have any inside information about how that recovery is going. And I think the best thing for us to do all is to wait and see how his recovery goes. But if he is able to recover and get back on the campaign trail before the 21st of August, as we hope he will, then he's clearly got an important role to play, firstly as a candidate in the seat of Griffith and potentially beyond then. But that really is a matter, I think, between Kevin Rudd and the Prime Minister. But I think first things first, let's just see how his recovery goes and leave that to him, his wife, Therese Rain, and his doctors.
Mark Butler and Senator Mitch Fifield, appreciate your time, gentlemen, as always. Thanks for that. And that's all for this edition of AM Agenda. We'll be back again at 12:30 Eastern for Lunchtime Agenda. I'm Kieran Gilbert. Thanks for your company.